Beijing's neutrality is looking less and less convincing. Ukraine's intelligence says 550 Chinese troops have completed military internships in Russia, and 180 Russian troops trained in China in a single month. Western governments have a word for what Beijing is doing. It is not neutrality. Kyiv says, the military partnership is no longer just diplomatic. It's happening inside classrooms, barracks, and training grounds. The relationship between Moscow and Beijing is growing deeper than previously known. Ukraine's military intelligence, known as HUR, says more than 550 Chinese troops have undergone internships at Russian military institutions as part of an expanding program of bilateral military cooperation. In a statement provided to Kyiv Post, HUR said the exchanges have become a consistent practice, involving cadets, instructors, and military educators from both countries. According to the agency, the program runs in both directions. In November 2025 alone, more than 180 Russian military personnel completed internships at Chinese military academies, specializing in infantry, armored warfare, engineering, aviation, and air defense.
A consistent practice has been formed of conducting mutual internships of cadets, as well as instructor and scientific and pedagogical staff at higher military educational institutions and training centers of the armed forces of the Russian Federation and the People's Liberation Army of China.
The Ukrainian intelligence agency says more than 550 Chinese soldiers have also completed internships at higher military educational institutions in Russia, suggesting defense cooperation extends beyond joint military exercises. The disclosure adds to growing Western concerns over Beijing's support for Moscow. Although China continues to describe itself as neutral in the war in Ukraine, Kyiv and several Western governments argue that Chinese exports of dual-use technology have helped sustain Russia's military production. China has publicly maintained it is a neutral party in the Ukraine war, a position that has grown increasingly difficult to sustain under scrutiny. However, previous reports have also pointed to expanding defense ties. Reuters reported earlier this year, citing European intelligence sources, that around 200 Russian troops had received military training in China, with some later deployed to the battlefield in Ukraine. US-based think tank the Institute for the Study of War reported in September 2025 that Chinese firms were contributing to Russia's production of long-range drones. A Bloomberg report in April 2026 echoed similar findings. Last month, the two countries announced a joint naval drill in the Pacific, dubbed Joint Sea 2026, to be conducted near Qingdao. Meanwhile, China and Russia continue to publicly deepen military cooperation. The growing partnership has also drawn political criticism in Europe. Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre has urged Beijing to use its influence over Moscow to push for a negotiated end to the war, warning that Europe-China relations will remain constrained as long as Beijing maintains close strategic ties with Russia. Neither Moscow nor Beijing has publicly responded to Ukraine's latest claims about the scale of the bilateral military internship program. China secretly trained around 200 Russian military personnel on its soil in late 2025, with some of those troops later returning to fight in Ukraine. According to a Reuters investigation citing 3 European intelligence agencies and classified documents reviewed by the agency, the covert training program was outlined in a Russian-Chinese military agreement signed in Beijing on July 2, 2025, by senior officers from both countries. According to Reuters, the agreement arranged for Russian troops to train at military facilities in Beijing and the eastern Chinese city of Nanjing, while hundreds of Chinese troops were also expected to receive training inside Russia.
By training Russian military personnel at an operational and tactical level who then participate in Ukraine, China is far more directly involved in the war on the European continent than previously known.
The report said the training focused heavily on drone warfare, electronic warfare, army aviation, and armored infantry tactics, all areas that have become central to the battlefield in Ukraine. Reuters reported that internal Russian military documents described multiple training sessions held at Chinese military facilities between November and December 2025. One course reportedly trained Russian soldiers to use drones alongside 82mm mortars, while another focused on air defense systems, electronic warfare rifles, and anti-drone technology.
Drone training for Russian personnel at Yibin's PLA Training Center for Military Aviation, 1st Brigade. The course centered around multimedia presentations and involved the use of flight simulators, training to use several types of FPV drone and 2 other types of drone, it said.
Another training session at a PLA military engineering university covered explosives, demining, and the removal of improvised explosive devices. The investigation also stated that several Russian personnel trained in China were military instructors capable of passing combat knowledge down through the Russian chain of command. One intelligence agency cited by Reuters said it had identified Russian troops who trained in China and later participated in drone combat operations in occupied Crimea and Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia region.
We had confirmed the identities of a handful of Russian military personnel who trained in China and had since been directly involved in combat operations with drones in Ukraine's occupied Crimea and Zaporizhzhia regions.
China's foreign ministry denied direct involvement in the war and told Reuters that Beijing maintains an objective and impartial stance on the Ukraine conflict.
On the Ukraine crisis, China has consistently maintained an objective and impartial stance and worked to promote peace talks. This is consistent and clear, and is witnessed by the international community. Relevant parties should not deliberately stoke confrontation or shift blame.
The revelations come as Chinese President Xi Jinping hosts Russian President Vladimir Putin in Beijing this week, reinforcing what both countries describe as an all-weather strategic partnership. Although China has repeatedly presented itself as neutral in the Ukraine war, Reuters reported that the latest findings suggest Beijing may be playing a far more direct operational role in supporting Russian military capabilities than previously acknowledged. When Xi Jinping and Donald Trump sat down in Beijing last week, the conversation apparently went places that neither government has been willing to confirm, including a remarkable assessment by the Chinese president that Vladimir Putin might one day regret invading Ukraine. According to several people familiar with the US reading of the summit, Xi made the comments during wide-ranging talks on May 15th. It is a notable shift. People familiar with Xi's meetings with former President Joe Biden say the Chinese leader never offered a personal judgment on Putin or the war, even in private. Those conversations were described as frank, but stopped well short of any verdict on Russia's decision to invade. The timing is hard to ignore. Putin is due in Beijing on May 20th for his own summit with Xi, arriving just days after the Chinese leader hosted Trump, and 25 years after Russia and China signed their landmark friendship treaty. Xi's reported remarks come as the war grinds through its 5th year with no end in sight. Ukraine has proven increasingly effective with long-range drone strikes, hitting targets near Moscow as recently as May 18th. Zelensky called those strikes entirely justified, coming days after Russia launched what Ukraine described as a record aerial assault on Kyiv. A Philadelphia congressman and senior Democrat on the NATO Parliamentary Assembly put the battlefield shift plainly.
The brave Ukrainians have reinvented warfare in much the same way the First World War reinvented warfare for the 21st century. Drone warfare has now become the norm and is revolutionizing the way we wage war.
There was a second thread to the Beijing talks that has drawn less attention but carries its own weight. Trump reportedly suggested during the summit that the United States, China, and Russia should work together against the International Criminal Court, telling Xi their interests were aligned on the matter. Whether Xi genuinely believes Putin is heading toward regret, or whether the comment was something more diplomatic, is impossible to know from the outside. What is clear is that something was said in that room that neither side wants on the record.